Hello. So today we're going to be talking about autism and deafness in the music classroom. Let's talk about autism first. Autism is also known as autism spectrum disorder, or ASD for short. The way that someone would go about getting a diagnosis is through a psychologist. And typically when you're a baby, you have, certain checkups. So you go when you're a newborn, when you're 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, whatever the standards may be for your situation, right? Well, at these checkups, the pediatrician or psychologist will look and see for behavioral milestones, right? That may include what age did your baby first smile at, laugh at, walk at, recognize their name. Can your child follow a point? Can they look and see where you're pointing, or do they just sit there and stare at your finger? Certain behavioral aspects that, each child should meet by a certain age, right? That are typically functioning. And that's why we have so many autism diagnoses, because we're able to catch it early, right? So the signs and symptoms of autism are actually defined in 2 books in America. We have the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. That's one resource that psychologists will use. And then we have Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. There are 3 types of autism. The first type is the highest functioning type. Some common symptoms are they might have a hard time initiating social interaction, maintaining friendship. They may just come off as really awkward, or just say things at the wrong time, things like that. Rituals and repetitive behavior is very important to them. So repetitive behavior can look like stimming. And what stimming is just any action or feeling, sensory thing that is really comforting to someone with autism, right? So that may look like, often they'll flap their hands, right? If they're excited or overwhelmed. They can rock back and forth. That's a very common one. Pacing, lining up things, literally anything that is comforting and focusing to them, or a way for them to express their emotions. As far as rituals go, rituals are important, whether that's bath time or the way that they are brought to school, the way that their food is placed on their plate. Literally anything can be super important to them. I know personally, I had to babysit someone with autism. He was a young boy, about 7 or 8, and I had to take him to therapy one day after I was babysitting him. And I took the different way that mom takes, right? And so that really upset him, and we had a meltdown, but we got through it. All right, so that's type 1, the mildest form of autism. Type 2 is the most moderate form. These people might have a hard time communicating. They may not speak in complete, full sentences. Typically, there's autistic people, or people with autism will have special interests, which could be anything. I mean, it could be language, it could be dinosaurs, plants. I know trains is a common one. Literally anything that you can think of, people with autism could have a special interest in it, right? So their special interests are pretty noticeable to the untrained eye. You may be just passing by and seeing someone whose special interest is dinosaurs, and they have 2 dinosaur figurines in their hand just walking by. It's very noticeable to someone on the outside who may not know them. It's really difficult to get type 2 on track again. So if they're starting to have a meltdown, or have signs of aggression, it's hard to refocus them. Conversations are hard to hold, even with help, or studying and going to therapy and learning how to converse. It's still hard. They are more likely to respond inappropriately. Changes in environment are upsetting. Same thing with the ritual. Routine is super important to them. All right, and let's go to type 3. Type 3 is the most severe quote-unquote case of autism. People who have type 3 may be nonverbal. Typically, people who are nonverbal can use certain signs like eat, and they can use bath, like car, maybe hot or cold, things like that they may need to communicate with their caregiver. They'll have difficulty expressing even non-verbally like what they want, so they may be frustrated out of the blue, and to a typical functioning person, you just see them sitting there one moment and the next moment they're screaming and beating on their chest or hitting themselves or punching something. Like, they can become violent quickly, all because they have these feelings that they don't know how to express. That's all it is. They're highly inflexible. They do not do change at all. It's super hard to get someone with type 3 to into a new routine or a new habit or change something about their life. Small tasks cause great distress. All right, moving right along. So some adaptations that we can have in the music classroom for type 1, 2, or 3. Typically type 3 will be in a special setting like music therapy, but type 1 and 2 students could definitely be in the average music classroom. People with autism can be very sensitive to loud sounds. Well, if you play percussion, that can be very upsetting, right? Or even a woodwind instrument, even a flute could be really sharp and piercing to their ear. It's all about the frequencies and the way that they can handle those sounds, right? So that may mean, you adjust the volume, put a mute in if they're playing saxophone, put a mute in their saxophone or their trumpet or whatever. Yes, there are mutes for saxophones. I know, it's blowing your mind. Musical sounds through tablets. Like, they use, people with autism often will use their tablets for communicating. So there's definitely apps out there for them to use where they can still compose and explore music. Simplify movements. No reason to make it difficult. Color coding. So I have an example of color coding right here. Each pitch is associated with a different color. You can do this with pitch being one color. A syncopated rhythm could be purple. Something in bass clef, if you're teaching a student piano or something in bass clef, could be a different color. Whatever works for them. Having a peer buddy is really awesome. A peer buddy might not be the student that is the most, the best at their instrument, but necessarily it needs to be a student who is engaged and motivated and encouraging and has patience and kindness in their heart. All right, moving right along, let's go to deafness in the music classroom. So deafness is also something that can be diagnosed pretty early. It's typically obvious if you're a hearing person interacting with a non-hearing child or baby. You call their name, snap by their ear, they won't react, right? That can be hard of hearing or deafness. It's also a spectrum. So typically caught early. Autoacoustic emissions is one of the tests that they can do. This is typically when it's like inner ear problems. So they may not have like some people might have something like malformation on the outside of their ear. This is literally like going in and testing the inside of their eardrum and getting feedback from that. It's good. It's really good for babies because sometimes they, it's hard. They can't tell you, yes, I can hear you, or no, I can't hear you, or shake their head or whatever, right? They could be asleep for this even. Okay, so some adaptations for deafness or hard of hearing people in the music classroom. You need to use a lot of facial expressions. This is really hard for times during COVID, right? That's why it's important to be so safe. But facial expressions and gestures are important. Try not to have any background noise, so if you have a loud air conditioning unit or something like that, try to limit the sound as much as possible. Or like, for example, you can hear someone practicing piano. This may not be a good space to have a lesson with the student right now who is hard of hearing or deaf. Let your student, if they gravitate towards percussion, let them play percussion. There's no reason why they can't do that. It's amazing that someone who is struggling with hearing is interested in music. We should enable their passions and let them pick whatever it is that their heart desires, okay? Establish clear beat. So that's a prep beat, giving them complete, like 4 beats, whatever. Establish it clearly and be consistent with it, so that way they know what to expect every time. And same thing with instruction. Really this goes for every typical kid, but just be super clear on what you want and before you move on. Some things specifically to avoid: don't walk around while teaching. I know that typically in a classroom movement is a great thing, but it's hard for them to read your lips. Like, what if I'm over here looking like this, giving instruction, and then I'd go like this? Like, well, you can't read my lips like that. So just keep that in mind. Don't talk while conducting. Like, giving instruction like that can be really distracting. So like, even saying something like, "That was really good, flutes," like that can throw them off completely. They won't know what you have said because they're focusing on a million things already. All right, and that was my presentation. Thank you.